We are going to be talking about joy and suffering this morning. I think it's appropriate. A lot of Beaver fans have always known joy and suffering, but some of the Oregon Duck fans, they don't really want to learn joy and suffering, but just bless our brother Chuck. We have been on a series of Faith to Fullness, and this month we're specifically focusing on fellowship, being the family of God. And we're going to use an encounter that I looked at a few weeks ago of Paul and Silas in the Philippian jail. And I brought the stocks back out, but I'm not going to make anybody get in there this morning. But it's a great symbol of joy and suffering, as you can just picture. We're going to read the story one more time. And as we do, I just want you to visualize Paul and Silas sitting in those stocks in a dark prison. I also want you to know that after the service, we're going to do a question and answer time again for anyone who has insights that I want to learn from or questions. And in order to inspire questions, because a disciple, someone who's learning is going to be processing, and well, what did you mean by that? And well, what about this scenario? And how do you apply that to my life today? Someone who's learning has questions. So most of my slides this morning, I'm just asking questions. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? To try and get more people asking questions, because I really want a place where we have space and freedom to ask our hard questions. This isn't a place to pretend that everything's good. This is a place to ask the hard things that are on our hearts and our souls. Now, as we went through the story last time, in Philippians, you can turn there, it's actually in Acts 16. And we're going to read that. And if you remember a few weeks ago, we kind of went through the nuts and bolts of the passage. Okay, what was happening, and how did Paul and Silas respond, and how did they, who were trapped in stocks, locked up in a dark room, how did they show their jailer what real freedom really looked like? And they did that through their testimony. They weren't afraid to cross boundaries. They did that through their worship that lifted them up out of their present situation and gave them perspective and joy to handle what was happening to them. And they did it through their fellowship, their commitment to each other, but also their commitment to the jailer. And they showed him what freedom looked like, and that provided a platform for them to build a healthy, diverse community, which was lacking in Philippi. Let's read that story. We're going to go Acts 16, 25 through 34, and we're going to focus on the jail. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God in the middle of a dark prison, locked up in stocks. And the prisoners were listening to them, and suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken. Immediately all the doors were opened, and everyone's bonds were unfastened. When the jailer woke and saw that the prison doors were open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, supposing that all the prisoners had escaped. But Paul cried with a loud voice, "Do not harm yourself. We're all here." And the jailer called for lights, and he rushed in, and trembling with fear, he fell down before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out, and he said, "Lords, what must I do to be saved?" They said, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. And he took them that same hour of the night and washed their wounds. He was baptized at once, he and all his family. Then he brought them up into his house, and he set food before them. And he rejoiced, along with his entire household, that they had believed in God. Now, today, as opposed to kind of going through it verse by verse and seeing what was there, we kind of did that last time. Today, I just kind of want to do more of a meditation on what was happening. Not happening in the community, happening in the prison, but what was happening in the souls of Paul and the jailer, the Roman. What was happening deep, deep within them, and what happens with us. I think as we reflect on Scripture, it always shows us more of who God is. But when you really spend time reflecting on Scripture, it also shows us more of who we are. So this is going to be a little bit more abstract, maybe a little more academic, but I think it's going to be really, really good heart stuff. Because the Romans' worldly values were sharply confronted by Paul's spiritual qualities. And Paul showed him that even under pressure, the things of the soul remain. So in order to really dive into this, if you recall, babe, can you get my markers out of my black sweater there? If you recall this diagram, this is you. And we have lots of layers. Remember, not like a cake has layers, like an onion has layers. We have our physical layer. We have within that a relational layer of how we relate and communicate, how we feel and think with each other in community. Within that, we have a moral layer, our will. How are we directing our emotions and our thoughts to relate within community so that we serve one another or we hurt one another? And deep, deep within all these layers, we have a spiritual layer that is either alive or is empty and dark. Now, what I want to do in our reflections this morning is I want to do a little compare and contrast, because as I was thinking about this passage, I was just struck by Paul's joy. And the difference between what we call pleasure and what we call joy. Because pleasure and joy are very, very different. And the world doesn't seem to know the difference. Have you noticed that? As we think about pleasure and joy specifically related to this diagram, I think one of the first things that we'll realize is pleasure always happens from the outward in, right? So like a cinnamon roll. Oh, I love cinnamon rolls, especially with lots of frosting. What's the point of a cinnamon roll without frosting? But when I eat a cinnamon roll, I start thinking of Thanksgiving, because my mom makes cinnamon rolls every Thanksgiving. And so as I'm tasting the cinnamon roll, I start to think about my mom, and I think about the holidays, and it starts coming through a few of these layers as I experience pleasure. And they're usually triggered by very specific physical things, right? It's a pleasure. It has to be seen, heard, touched, right? From our five senses. But joy is very mysterious. It's very difficult to specify what is it that brings joy, because joy is inward out. And I was just, as I thought about Paul, how was he able to sing praises in the stocks in that dark prison? It's because his joy was inward out. It didn't seem to matter what was happening to him physically. His joy was on the inside. And joy works itself out, whether you're singing or clapping or hugging or smiling. Joy works itself out. And then as I continued to think about pleasure and joy, one of the other things that we see in all kinds of stories, maybe it's Edmund on his first trip into Narnia and getting a Turkish delight, and it never seems to last very long. Temporary. Pleasure is very, very temporary. It feels good, but I need like a dozen cinnamon rolls, right? Because 2 minutes after the first one is gone, I want another one. It's so temporary. And it seems like the more pleasure you have, the more temporary it seems to be, right? Like yesterday, I had one cinnamon roll, and it made me feel the holidays. Today, I have to get 2 cinnamon rolls in order to get that same experience, because it's so fleeting. But there's something big. I don't know if we can call that eternal about joy. When someone is experiencing joy, it's something within themselves is fulfilled perfectly. Everything has come together and there's a completeness to it. This is the way that things are supposed to be. Always. There's either a personal purpose that's been fulfilled, or something that I contributed to has changed the world. You think of, I was watching Moneyball the other day, and he could not lose. Because if they were to lose, then the world would write them off, because they were trying lots of new things in baseball. If they lost, then the world would forget about them. He had to win every single game, and he had to win the World Series because he had to change the game. You need to change the world. You need to make it as it was meant to be. There's something big and eternal about joy when you're actually experiencing that. The world has been changed, and I've been a part of it. Well, as you can imagine, the more temporary pleasure becomes, the more power, the more addictive it is. Now, I want to give a little caveat, because pleasure is not bad. Pleasure is good. God created pleasure. He created all of our senses, and He created ways that we'd find delight in all of those senses. Pleasure isn't bad. But pleasure, like everything else that God created, can be misused. Pleasure can be replaced. So pleasures are addictive. And the problem with pleasure is that when we figure out what brings us pleasure, we want to try and reproduce it, right? Man-made. So we can't help but try, that felt so good. I want to do that again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. I want to reproduce it all the time, because I always want to feel that way. And it slowly becomes, has a hold over us. Yeah, in a very real sense, when you follow this path, you end up in the stocks of pleasure. You keep coming back to the stocks and locking yourself in because it has power over the way you live. You think of the opioid crisis today in the country. They want to feel that way again so badly that they will sacrifice everything else in their lives just to feel that way one more time. Addictive, as opposed to joy, which is savored. You're not really sure what were the ingredients that all went into the experience in the first place. There's no way to try and predict and reproduce it. And in fact, when you're in that moment, to try and reproduce that would just cheapen it. It's something special. It's something holy. It's a once in a lifetime kind of thing, and you just bask in it. It was something that was meant to be. Now, the real question, as we focus this month on fellowship, is how do these two things affect our fellowship? Pleasure is impersonal and isolating. Probably the best example of that is our culture's issue with porn. You've given up real fellowship, and you pursue pleasure on your own, on your screen, in a dark room, wherever. It becomes more and more isolating, and you have less and less to do with real healthy relationships. And the same is true with every single pleasure. If you make that your focus, if you pursue that with your time and your energy and your heart, you become further and further away from community. As opposed to joy. Joy is, in its very essence, relational. And you think of somebody receiving an award, a lifetime achievement award, right? They get up and they give a little speech, and they're so overwhelmed, and they just start thanking everybody. I thank my mom and my dad, and I thank my friends, and I thank my director, and I thank, because they realize that I get to experience the fullness of this moment, but really this joy belongs to everybody. My whole community made this happen. It wasn't just me. Or you think of the athlete standing up with their medal on the stand, representing their school or representing their country. It's because of the opportunities and the support and everything that I had that this moment is even possible. Joy is relational, and it's full of community. Why is it that so many of us, as I'm sure the Roman soldier did through his lifetime, why do so many of us choose this path instead of this path? There's a lot of stories. Many atheists, Aldous Huxley was one of the most well-known atheist authors, and he was very open and honest about his choice. When he went to college, he started having sex. And he's very honest. At that point, when I was introduced to Christianity, it was a very clear choice. I could either do what I want to do and keep having sex, or I could go and try and figure out what God wants me to do. And he chose pleasure. He wanted to do it his way. He wanted to determine what was good for him. He didn't want God to determine what was good for him, so he chose atheism. He chose pleasure. The problem with choosing pleasure is that either consciously or unconsciously, You have to choose to prioritize the physical. And you say, well, really, we're just animals. And we have instincts and appetites, and it's okay. Just follow those. Just feel good physically. And you have to intentionally suppress the moral and spiritual parts of yourself. No, we don't have eternal souls. We're just beasts. And that frees you then, if you're able to suppress these layers, that frees you then to do whatever you want physically. Whatever makes you feel good is okay. Go ahead and do it. And the problem with that, over time, is what it does to your relationships, your community. It was interesting, I was listening to a podcast, Ravi Zacharias, and he commented that a majority of time it is not suffering that causes depression, it's pleasure. Too much pleasure. Because you engage in all these things and do whatever you want, and the more you do it, the less satisfying it becomes. And the more isolated you become. And when you've tried it all and you've done everything and you're still completely unfulfilled, you end up in depression. You're alone, you're in despair, and you're bored. You've tried it all, you're bored. A great example of that is Ecclesiastes, the preacher, right? He's the all-powerful, wealthy king of Jerusalem. And he goes through this list of in practicing wisdom and trying to figure out what life is all about. I didn't withhold any delights from my eyes or my body. I tried everything. In Ecclesiastes 6:7, all the toil of man is for his mouth, yet he's never satisfied. He's never satisfied. It's all meaningless. It's vanity. There's no point. This ties in with what Gina had to say when she mentioned her book on the tribes. Right? Even in the midst of war, extreme suffering, people experienced a sense of purpose and a sense of community because they were in it together and they were doing something meaningful. Even when pleasure is completely stripped away. Pleasure isn't bad. What the Bible has to say about it is God does not want us to trade something lesser for something greater. And the treasures of God lie in our eternal souls. The physical is good, but don't trade the physical for the spiritual. Don't give up your soul for your body, because it will not lead to joy. That's not how you were designed. God designed you to know joy when your soul is fulfilled, not when your body is pleasured. And you'll never find happiness by pursuing it in the opposite way. Or whatever you do will be extremely temporary, extremely addictive, and extremely isolating. The Roman knew this. I mean, he was a Roman soldier. He'd seen the world. He'd done it all. The highs, the lows, he knew everything. He'd tried it all. And he'd never seen a joy that withstands suffering. Right? The disciples as well. Look at any of the disciples. Jesus' 12 disciples, Paul and Silas in the stocks, they seem to have a completely different attitude towards suffering. It's almost like they pursued it. Like they avoided pleasure. Because they were intentionally living from their souls. James 1:2 says, "Count it all joy when you meet trials." Enjoy your trials. Why? Because those trials for you will be the testing of your faith that will produce steadfastness. Because those trials will bring you to perfect completion. And you will lack nothing. Not physically, spiritually. Not through pleasure, but through suffering, actually. Because when everything is good, it's hard to differentiate. Okay, is my soul good or is my body good? But when your body is not good, when you're in the midst of suffering, you can tell if your soul is in the right place or not. Because you don't have all of these pleasure distractions trying to help you pretend that things are good. You know things aren't good on the outside. And it makes you look, are things good in here? The disciples looked forward to those opportunities. In crazy ways. They rejoiced in their sufferings, that they were able to share in what Jesus himself went through, and the effect that they had on people who were watching them and go, who are those crazy guys? When suffering hits, pleasures vanish. You know, pleasure and pain are opposites. But joy and suffering are not opposites. Because when suffering hits, joy doesn't go away. Joy doesn't go away because joy is from the inside out. That joy comes from having such a strong sense of purpose and a strong sense of belonging, fellowship, that can withstand anything. And when suffering hits, or when there's just so much joy, what is our tendency, as opposed to isolation, is to share it. Whether we're in suffering or whether we're in the moment of victory, we just want to share joy. Because it's the thing that gives us hope to keep going. A jail full of Joyfull. Now, I don't want to go too in depth, but I have to make a note of this because it's something that I have struggled with in my life. And if you've been in the church for any amount of time, I'm pretty sure you have struggled with it too. And I know that the Roman jailer did as well. A strong sense of duty. Versus a quality of sacrifice. And I propose to you that duty, much like pleasure, is a good thing that is often misused. Because duty is also an outward in. And I know some of you are not going to like this. Because I know I didn't like it. Duty is an outward in, sacrifice is an inward out. See, let me kind of clarify this, what I mean by duty is an outward in. Over time, again, we're talking about over time, what does this effect have on our soul and on our fellowship? Over time, duty becomes measured by if you do the right things or how much you are contributing to the fellowship. Are you doing all the right things? And hopefully, by doing all the right things, by reading your Bible, by serving in the kitchen, by doing all these things for God, you're hoping that some of that is going to soak in is going to make you feel good about yourself. It's going to make you liked by the rest of the group and appreciated. And it's going to soak into your soul so that even God will say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." The problem is, just like pleasure, is people get stuck out here because it's outward in. And when suffering hits, you can't handle it. You're angry. You're angry at people who receive the love of God for free. They didn't do anything to get the love of God. What's up with that? I do all this stuff to get the love of God and I don't feel good. Why is this suffering happening to me? I'm doing all the right things. I'm trying as hard as I can. Why doesn't God love me? Why don't I get a raise at work? Why? And you list off all the things that you're doing for God. And you get more and more angry and more isolated. We're going to focus a little bit more on that, I think, on our question and answer time. Because duty, we often put religious words on it to make it righteous. We're being faithful. We're self-controlled. We're wise stewards. We have all these religious words that we put on it, but really it's outward in. And Paul and Silas in those stocks, they looked at the soldier and his duty, and they showed him what sacrifice was. Because sacrifice is inward out. And he was blown away. Because this soldier who had been faithful to his country, he'd killed for his country. He knew what duty was. He knew what loyalty was. But when locked up in prison and there's an earthquake and all the jail cells open, that soldier is going to run away. It's his duty to run away, to fight another day. He did not understand what sacrifice was. It blew him away. I don't understand this inward out thing that you have. See, as with pleasure, we often choose to be animals. With duty, we often choose to be robots. And both are soulless. Both are empty. Suffering, much like pain exists to warn us that something is wrong, something's harmful. Suffering exists to show us that something is deeply wrong. And when suffering hits, both pleasure and duty are wiped out. Because pleasure and duty aren't working. They're meaningless. They show us what's inside. And neither pain and suffering are bad. They're both good things in that they're warning us. But at the same time, God, this is what I've been thinking about this week, God did not intend for us to know suffering. That's another one of my propositions for you to think about. God intended for us to know joy, because in the beginning, Adam and Eve in the garden, in the tree of good, the knowledge of good and evil, God gave them an inherent sense of joy. Right? How do you know good? Because it makes you happy. It's healthy, it's full. This is the way things were meant to be. How do you know evil? Suffering. My proposition is that God withheld suffering from Adam and Eve. He didn't want them to know evil. But Adam and Eve were tricked, and they stole this quality of God that he did not intend for them to have. They stole suffering. There are so many things that I do not want my kids to learn. I don't want them to learn pain. I don't want them to learn betrayal. I don't want them to learn all of these painful things that we see in the world and in the news every day. I don't want them to have suffering, because through suffering they'll know all of the evil that exists. But Adam and Eve stole the ability to suffer from God. It's a burden he did not want them to have. They stole suffering, and because suffering exists in the world, we know evil. Because it hurts. Because it's harmful. Because it destroys community. But we asked for it. We demanded the capacity to suffer from God. Suffering helps us to know evil, and suffering helps us to know ourselves, because it strips away all the physical and the relational, and it just leaves us exposed, what's really inside. Jesus suffered more than anyone. Right? He knew our pain, but he also knew evil. He took our pain and our suffering, the physical and the spiritual. He took it all and he placed it upon himself. And he suffered to the full. And he did it joyfully. God, who knew all things, who planned all things, he took all pain and suffering upon himself. And because of the joy set before him, he endured the cross. Jesus delights in taking your pain and your suffering. It's what makes him happy, because it's his eternal purpose. That's how he is contributing to the family of God. That's his role. It's what he does. And he loves doing it. He loves suffering for you. As weird as that sounds. Not only does he want to take your pain and your suffering, but he wants to fill you with the joy that he has. He said to his disciples, I've been speaking all of these things to you so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be full. My purpose is to take my joy, to take your suffering, and to give you my joy. And that's the thing that people of duty don't understand. Because we have the pleasure seekers and we have the pleasure deniers. But duty people don't understand that it's joy. Jesus came to fill us with joy. He didn't come to make us do all the right things. He came to fill us with joy and to make us a part of community. Do you know what's in your soul? I know a lot of you are going through intense pain and suffering. We're in the world. And I know that some of you are trapped in pleasure, and you don't know how to beat it. And I know that some of you are trapped in duty. Do you know what's in your soul? Like the Roman, you know pleasure and duty. You're very familiar with those things. But do you know what Jesus does for you? Do you know how he wants to fill you? Do you know that he wants to make you a part of a healthy, diverse fellowship? You're going to have to give up the temporary. You're going to have to give up the addictive and the isolating things in your life. You're going to have to choose to be a part of a growing, living fellowship. Because joy and sacrifice are the qualities upon which a healthy, diverse community must build itself on. You can't build a community on pleasure. You can't build a community on independence. Sorry. There's so many things. In the West, in this goal of unity and diversity, in the West, we give up unity in order to achieve diversity. We're all different, we're all creative, so you do your thing and let me do my thing, and really we're independent. There's not really any unity whatsoever. Certainly no fellowship. I mean, just look at the news. There's this side and there's this side. There's no unity. But we have diversity. In the East, they give up diversity for unity. As whether it's a strong Asian culture or most religious cultures, in order to achieve unity, they require conformity. Strong hierarchy, everybody prays the same way, everybody does the same things. In order to achieve community that's healthy and diverse, it has to be built on joy and mutual sacrifice. It's something that this church experienced and grew in. The church in Philippi, this Roman jailer, Lydia, the house group that started from their fellowship, they were known across the Mediterranean and throughout church history as a church that knew joy and generosity. They got it. Because of Paul and Silas in the stocks, they got it. And they built a family on joy and sacrifice. If we are going to have an impact on our city, we need joy and we need sacrifice. These qualities that will lead us to a healthy community. I want to leave you with some homework. Some homework that will help us to live from our soul and to grow in joy and humility and generosity. One is to continue this discussion with your kids. Teach them the difference between pleasure and joy. These spiritual and moral things aren't taught in the news, and they're not taught in schools. We have to show them that pleasure is good, but joy is better. The Bible doesn't just give us lots of rules to do the right things. The Bible shows us not to give up the lesser for the greater. Don't ever, going off to college, whatever you do, never, ever give up the lesser for the greater. Or never give up the greater for the lesser. Continue that discussion. Another option, read Philippians 1. Several years later, Paul is writing a letter to the Philippians. And he's like, hey guys, it's been a while. Yeah, I'm in jail again. Philippians chapter 1 is absolutely full of joy. He misses them with all of his heart and soul. And he's still talking about sacrifice. The third bit of homework for some of you is do not leave here today isolated. If you're trapped in pleasure, if you're trapped in duty, take a step today, right now after the service, and come and find someone up here who will talk with you and pray with you. Because you do not have to stay isolated and trapped. And don't forget, question and answer time, where we're going to continue. I know this was all very philosophical and big, but it's so, so important. And I just pray that God would continue to speak to your souls this week as you think about pleasure and joy and duty and sacrifice. And when suffering comes, because I guarantee suffering will come in some small or big way this week, I pray that you will be equipped to handle it a little bit better because of Paul and Silas and their example in that jail full of Joyfull. Go with the peace and blessing of our great Savior, Jesus Christ. Have a great week.